of minutes over.
Yep,
Hey, Tom.
I have no hard constraints either.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, Tom, thank you so much for joining. By the way, I
Yeah,
love the glasses.
thanks.
I know that's your color. For people who probably don't know Tom, and I don't know why you're not better known. I don't know how that sounds to you, but you should be better known in the space. For example, I found you just 3 years ago, and I found a lot of other SEOs who know much less than you much earlier, right? And for some context, I found you through your blog, and I was blown away by the amount of information that had and the level of detail and the sophistication of it, right? So that was amazing. And then you had pre-launched your SEO MBA course. I missed the first pre-launch. There was second pre-launch, which was just still in the beta stage. I joined in there, and I got to learn a ton from it. And I don't know if you remember this, but I had pitched the idea of SEO enablement to you.
I
And
remember that. I remember it well. Yeah.
oh, awesome. And that was when we were just like thinking of the idea, and you basically said, "Hey, that sounds good." So we just ran with it, and we've seen amazing sort of reception for it, and it's been great for us as well. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's great. That's great. It's good to hear. I'm glad that that's going well for you. And thanks for the kind words. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I used to be much more active in the SEO world like a decade ago, right? Like 15 years ago.
Wow.
I used to do blogging for Moz and all of that stuff way back in the day. But I feel like these days I'm kind of focusing on the SEO MBA newsletter for the most part. So yeah, but I really appreciate the words.
Yeah, why don't you maybe just introduce yourself? Because there's a lot you can say about yourself. And there's a very interesting question someone asked. I'll ask you that right after the introduction.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll keep it quick. Working in SEO and digital marketing for yeah, more than 15 years now. I got my start working at Distilled with my brother Will Critchlow. Did that for a long time, and that was where we had the partnership with Moz and so on. And then I worked at Google for a couple of years, about 2012, 2014, doing nothing to do with SEO, but working at Google. I remember I emailed Matt Cutts for some SEO advice when I was working at Google. And he was like, I can't answer that question. And I was like, okay, fair play, fair play. And then for the last, yeah, like 9 years now, I've been an independent consultant, really kind of straddling content strategy, digital strategy, helping businesses kind of invest in new channels and new capabilities. Some of that involves SEO, but less and less these days is kind of like I'm doing an SEO audit or keyword research, although I still get my hands dirty every now and again. And I like to kind of really focus on the executive level challenges, which is I think is where the SEO MBA came from. So I launched the SEO MBA about 2 years ago now, as a platform to really focus on the business skills and kind of communication skills that SEO professionals need. Because the biggest challenge that SEO professionals face is not knowing what to do, it's knowing how to get it done. Right? It's knowing like how do
Yeah.
you communicate
Yeah.
to senior stakeholders, how do you get buy-in and budget for the things you want to do, and how do you persuade developers to actually do your work, right? Actually implement the things that you want to get implemented.
Oh yeah. I have horror stories from my own experience trying to get it
We all
implemented,
do, yeah. Everyone does, right?
and all the mistakes I've made, because after doing the course, I could see it. I could see, oh, this is why I couldn't get it done, and it was all my fault, right? For example, I used to lead SEO at a fintech unicorn, so I could see all the mistakes I made right after you said it, and it was so obvious after you said it, but it would have probably never occurred to me for a very long time at least. So yeah, I should have taken, or you should have built the course earlier. I'll put it on you. So
Yeah, so sorry, I should have gone back in time and done it sooner. My bad.
so one interesting, so I posted this about the session in one of these communities, right? And one of the questions I got was, um, how do you do SEO for Google? Or like, what does that mean? Like
Yeah,
that was,
sure. Yeah. Well, so actually, so there's a number of people that do SEO at Google, and bear in mind that I worked at Google in 2012, which is like more than a decade ago now. So I'm sure things have changed a little bit. But when I was there, the challenges that you face are basically the same challenges that everyone else faces, right? For example, imagine that you're running SEO for Gmail, right? And so you look at the website and you're like, oh, well, you type gmail.com into your browser and that does a redirect to your logged in Gmail, right? And it's like, oh, well, can Googlebot crawl that redirect? Have we set up the redirect correctly? Like, okay, well, Gmail is in every single language. Have we done the hreflang correctly on the website? Oh, as the marketing website, do we have enough pages that rank for whatever it is, whatever the keywords are that you care about, like enterprise, email, or whatever? And like somewhat surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the challenge is the same, right? Like you have some developers, you email them and you say, hey, we messed up the redirects on this thing. Can we fix it? And they say, yeah, kind of, but I've got other things that I'm doing. And then you have to explain the value of it and you have to, so I think that, there are many parts of Google that are so far removed from search that doing SEO for those parts of Google is just like doing SEO for any other business. I think the good news, obviously, is that people understand the value of search, at least, right? That usually isn't, it's not usually a hard fight to be able to say, Google is important. But I think the challenge is the same. And if anything, Google is also a very, very engineering forward company, obviously. And so sometimes it is difficult, I think, to try and advocate for the value of content, a marketing website, landing pages, things like that, when the development team, the product team is almost certainly focused on, building features, building robust infrastructure, scalability. They're like, hey, I got to make Gmail work for 2 billion people. You're asking me to fix a redirect, like, what the hell? So I think that, same challenges, right? Now, obviously, I think if you get closer to the search product, so doing SEO for anything related more closely to search, then I think you get into much more of like, okay, now you're sitting down with the search team and doing those kinds of things. But I wasn't involved in any of that when I was there. I was much more on the marketing side. So
That I think I had to ask that question first because a lot of people had that in their mind. So yeah, glad that we got that. And it's very interesting seeing that it's you saying it looks the same. I'll just ask the second story with the second question with the second story, right? So I had this conversation maybe a year back, maybe 6 months ago, with one of the senior leaders at, let's just say, a very large company. We probably all have something from there at all of our homes, right? So now she basically said, and she was like, let's say, like the head of marketing, right? So basically, she said that, hey, I have this SEO in my team, and he seems very experienced. I think he knows what he's doing. I have no idea what he's doing, and I don't know how to speak with that person. Like, her problem was that I don't know what he's saying to and what to do with what he's saying to me,
yeah.
or what do I tell him? Because my goals are, and I'm changing this part now. Let's say for in our industry, it's SQLs, MQLs,
Yep.
and this person is talking about backlinks and impressions, and I don't care about this stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't know like what to do, and I'll just maybe like let you comment on that.
Yeah. I mean, this is the latest email that I wrote for the SEO MBA about input metrics, which is so many executives have they have some understanding that SEO is important, right? So it's like, I understand that organic traffic is useful to the business, and therefore I understand that SEO is important to the business. But if you ask them to really like break down, well, what does the SEO person on your team do? They're like, I don't know. Right? It's like SEO in, revenue out, but the middle bit is just a black box. There's just an unknown. It's just like I don't actually understand what that does. And unfortunately, I think sometimes we actually pride ourselves on this a little bit in the SEO industry, right? It's a very technical discipline. You have to understand, thousands of ranking factors. It's like we're like the mad scientist in the corner who has all this knowledge, all this like unique stuff. We understand so many different pieces, but none of that is helpful to executives. Right? None of that is useful, and further, it's a real risk if your boss and your boss's boss and the executive team doesn't understand how SEO works, and not just about understanding like the broad strokes of like, yes, SEO traffic is important, but actually understanding like the SEO program for this business involves these three things, right? It's like producing content, making sure the technical foundations are strong, and doing digital PR or whatever the pillars are for your business, right? But making it clear that these are the levers we need to pull, right? If we don't pull those levers, we're not going to see results, right? And this is the whole thesis of input metrics, which Amazon really talks about. There's a great book, Working Backwards, which really talks about the inner workings of how Amazon operates, and they have this whole concept about input metrics, which I think is just great. And it's really about saying, it's like, we shouldn't be reporting on what happened, right? Which is like traffic, revenue, right? We should be reporting on what we did, on what we are doing, right? The activities that we're doing that will impact traffic and revenue, right? And so it's this distinction between input metrics and output metrics. And I think this is the thing for SEO, which is that, okay, what are the inputs? Like, what are you actually doing to move the needle, right? You're not just sat there like waving a magic wand doing SEO, right? You're actually doing something. And the more that you can explain to the business and educate to the business that these are the things that need to be done, then not only will you get more buy-in and more budget from people, but also you actually have a better chance of getting those things done, right? Because the hard thing with SEO, again, is, especially when you're like the SEO person inside a business, you actually can't do very much typically, right? All you can really do is tell other people to do things, right? You're like, hey, you got to go fix the analytics, and like, hey, you got to go fix these redirects, and hey, you got to go write some content. Like, you're just pointing fingers at other people to be like, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. And so SEO is a communication role, right? It's a coordination role. And if SEO is this black box where nobody understands how it works, nobody's going to do anything for you, right? And so it's really important to really reduce the thousands of ranking factors down into, okay, for this business, there are 3 things we need to do, or 4 things we need to do, whatever. Like, keeping it focused, keeping it easy to understand. And obviously, there's going to be some weird stuff that crops up occasionally, right? It's like, you're going to be like, you know what, I got to go fix this hreflang issue, and it's complicated and it's technical, and you don't necessarily need to explain that to everyone in the business. But like, that also isn't a strategy, right? It's like the strategic level, there has to be some notion of, we need to produce content. That's a lever we can pull. We need to fix the website and make it performant. That's a lever we can pull. And we need to do digital PR to build links. That's a lever we can pull, right? And again, this is how you can start to build a business model, right? So in the SEO MBA course, I talk about this a lot, which is, you've really got to connect it back to the financials, right? You talk about SQLs and MQLs. It's like, okay, what is the lifetime value of the SQL or MQL? And then how do we demonstrate the value of SEO off the back of it? And it isn't just saying, okay, if we get 5% more traffic, then we'll get $1 million in revenue, right? Because again, where did that 5% number come from, right? What you really need to do is you need to connect it back to doing something. You need to say, if we make 20 pieces of content, then we'll get $1 million in revenue. If we fix these 25 pages, then we'll get $1 million in revenue, right? So it's about connecting the inputs to the outputs, because what's really important is, and I've seen this happen sometimes, right? Like, the executives is sat there saying, okay, I understand the value of SEO. You're asking for budget, so I'm going to give you budget, right? But then nothing happens, right? Because the development team wasn't bought in. Nobody actually understands. They're just this, like, again, this black box. It's like, oh, you're going to wave your magic wand and we're going to get the results. It's like, no, we actually have to do something, right? Like, it's the doing something which is the critical component. And it's about educating the whole business about what that is.
Yeah, and then so even after, I think, managing this, after going through the course, and I've gotten better over time, but I think me and even our team, right, we do mess up this communication part till date. For example, there's this client, we love this client, right? So large B2B SaaS, I think it's in the trucking space in the US, right? And they're amazing to work with, like absolutely amazing, like great people in there, really amazing to speak with. We have this sprint where we tell them to create just 24 pieces of content, and then we sort of try and guess at how many we'll get SQLs from it directly. We don't talk about impressions, we're not talking about traffic. We try and follow that as much as possible, as close to revenue. You talk about matching the left hand side and right hand side, so try to do that. But we just couldn't get anyone to publish anything. The feedback was, hey, we loved talking with you, we know you've never missed a deadline, it's all our fault. They're not even blaming us, but we still just couldn't get it done. There was like 6 layers of hierarchy. So yeah, I'm not sure, like, how do you get better at it?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a a fundamental problem with any kind of consulting, not just SEO consulting, right? Which is that persuading a business to do something is really hard. Like we should just take that for like we should just acknowledge that getting any business to do anything is hard, right? Businesses, ironically, are not designed to do things, right? Businesses are designed to do what they're currently doing, but trying to get them to do something differently or doing something new is a struggle. It's an uphill battle, right? And actually, a lot of executive teams, again, ironically, they spend all day long saying no to things. They spend all day long saying, nope, I'm not going to do new things. Nope, I'm not going to get distracted by the shiny objects. Nope, I'm not going to do that project. Nope, I'm not going to give you budget. Like focus, 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 right? A lot of executives are really just terrified of doing too many things, right? And trying to do new things that sound nice but don't work. They're just like, focus on the basics, focus on these things. So it's really hard to get a business to do anything, right? So I think that's it's worth embracing that. I think one of the ways that I really like to tackle this is to tackle it basically head on, right? It's basically at the beginning of a project with a client, and I mean really the beginning, right? Either during the sales process or in the very first phone calls that I have with the client. You have a rough sense of what the answer is, right? You're kind of like, well, I know we have to do some things with the website, right? Obviously, the website has some issues, or I know we need to produce some content, right? Obviously, there's an opportunity around that, or whatever it might be. And so bringing that at the very beginning of the project, say, we're going to need to make like 50 pieces of content. How are we going to get that done, right? And then saying, well, you know, the most likely way this project fails is that we don't get those pieces of content live, right? Your content team is too busy, or you have too many other things going on, distractions, priorities, whatever. And so how are we going to make sure this project doesn't fail? How are we going to make sure that we can get some content live? I think one of the mistakes, and I'm not saying that you guys make this mistake, but one of the mistakes that I see is you come into the project and everyone's happy and you're like, okay, we're going to do a technical audit, we're going to do keyword research, we're going to do content strategy. And by the time you get like 8 weeks into the project, you're saying, hey, great, okay, so here's the 50 pieces of content you got to write. And at that point, that kicks off like, oh, well, where are we going to find a writer, or how are we going to get that into the queue? By the time those pieces of content go live, it's like 5 months into the project, right? And so now people are getting antsy. They're like, wait, we haven't seen any results. We're 5 months in, So I really try and kind of shortcut that by trying to, on day one of the project, say, we're going to need some content. Like, we don't know exactly what pieces of content yet. We don't have the keywords. We don't have the briefs. Like, we can get to that, but like, we know we're going to need to make it. So let's kick off the resourcing conversation like now, right? Let's make sure that we have either your writers or developers or designers or whatever it is we're going to need. Let's make sure we have those people queued up, ready to go, so that we can get these things done when we recommend them, rather than going away into the the black box, coming back and saying, hey, we have these recommendations, and the client is like, wait, now I need developers on the project. Like, okay, that's like, it kicks off a whole separate project.
This is a mistake we made. So I'm very happy to admit it, but thank you for sort of pointing it out. So, for example, we give our recommendations in week 3. So week 1 and week 2, and we sort of make sure everything is clear before week 1 and 2. But week 1 and 2, we're not talking about the implementation at all. I think that's been one gap from our end. So yeah, that's something that, again, thank you so much for pointing it out. We will fix it.
Well, I mean, listen. First of all, I love the ability to acknowledge that you make mistakes, right? There's a lot of people in this industry that would not have that kind of humility. So, and I have certainly made these mistakes myself also. Like, the only reason that I know how to talk about this stuff is because I've been there and done that. I have failed. I have sent the 100-page technical audit. Like, I've been there and I've done that. I've seen it go wrong. The other thing that and especially as you had this when we talked about this kind of SEO enablement, right? And the kind of the idea of building an SEO program, not just building an SEO project, right? So like helping clients build the ability to do SEO, right? One thing that I've done more and more as I've gotten more senior in my work, and as I get kind of more access to clients and I get bigger budgets and so on, is when I speak to a client on day one and I say, okay, we're going to need to make 100 pieces of content, and the client says, well, we don't have a writer, or we don't have the resources, or they're busy or whatever, then it becomes part of the project to go and hire a writer, right? And like manage that writer and then oversee production of the content. So instead of looking at like, I'm only going to do the SEO component and I'm only going to give recommendations. It's like if you want to focus on enablement, if you want to focus on getting things done and building the SEO program, it's work, right? Like go find a writer, right? Go hire the writer, go manage the writer, put the processes in place, train the writer, right? Like all of that is like totally valid, useful work for the client. Even though not a single piece of content has gone live, you should still be getting paid for finding the writer and doing the work, right? Like if that's what the client needs, that's the work that needs to be done. Go do it, right? Put that in part of the contract, right? Don't only do the technical audit and the content strategy. It's like do what needs to get done, right? That's always been my philosophy. SEO as a discipline touches so many different parts of the business, right? Content, marketing, product, engineering, etc. It's like don't be afraid to get involved and like roll up the sleeves and get into those projects if that's the thing the client needs, right? If you've diagnosed that there's an opportunity, go help figure it out, right? And that might be with your own expertise, right? Like hiring a writer is something that you and I can probably do, but it might be, oh, we're gonna go find an external development company, or we're gonna go find a designer. Like I don't have those skills, but I know how to find somebody. I can go find somebody. I can give them a brief. I can give them an RFP. Like I can manage that project. And so I think that's also like when you think about SEO and if you think about your success, the only thing of success is actually getting work implemented. Then it's like how do you focus on all of the obstacles and all the objections? How do you overcome each of those to really drive towards that that idea of things that are done, things that are implemented on the
I really appreciate the advice. I know. Uh, I'll try and move on to the things that I think others also want to hear, because I am enjoying this. I'm not sure how useful it is for others. Uh, so the next one, you do talk about a lot of about you, and you were referring to this also, right? Is using the input metrics. Um, for example, so I'll ask two specific questions here, right? So one, how is this different from just having a plan of, hey, X number of content pieces, which sounds more like a plan than any sort of goal, which is metric driven? And second is how, for example, we do something that we call leading indicators, lagging indicators, and then build that differently. So is input metrics, what you're suggesting, is something that comes before leading indicators, or where does it sort of fit in the funnel?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a lot of gray area, right? About input metrics and output metrics sounds black and white, but it's not nearly that simple, right? And actually, like you said, there's a lot of like leading indicators can be good input metrics, and the point of input metrics is not actually to choose things that are completely 100% within our control, but the point of input metrics is to choose things which are more directly under our control than output metrics, right? So it's like revenue and traffic, for example, things like that are definitely not directly under our control, right? They're definitely second order results of things that are done. And so the idea is, how do we find things that are closer to things under our control, and how do we find metrics which actually move month to month, right? So again, part of the problem with SEO is that sometimes it can take a long time, right? Some things are fast, some things are slow. And so what you want to do is you want to find things that you can report on every month. Right? And that could be like number of pieces of content made, it could be number of pages optimized, it could be number of title tag tests run, like whatever the activity is, we need things that we can report on month to month. And then the second piece of your question, which is, it's about, it isn't necessarily about creating the plan to say we're going to make all of this content, but it's about creating the visibility at the executive layer to say this month we made this number of pieces of content, right? So it's actually putting it in the reporting frame, right? It's actually putting it into that management reporting to say these are the things we did this month, and we have confidence that those things will result in revenue at some point further on. And obviously, what you want to do in a perfect world, and this is easier said than done, is you actually want to show the link. So after you've done this for a while, you should be able to show, hey, this month we did more of it, and the month after we got more revenue. Like there is a link here, right? You want to show that link. That takes more work, right? And that takes more time, right? To be able to actually directly show that link. In the early days, you have to rely on expertise, right? And be able to say like, we know that, or we have a strong belief that doing this will lead to that. But the other component is, when you read the book Working Backwards and you look at the kind of things that Amazon does, the key piece here isn't that it isn't just about choosing input metrics, right? Like number of pieces of content made. It's about really getting detailed with those input metrics, really getting to what is the closest measure of action that will lead in the real results you want. So it isn't just about number of pieces of content, but it might be the number of pieces of content that are over 3,000 words that end up getting more than 4 backlinks, right? That we publish this month, right? And that's the number you report on, right? And so it's about iterating on these metrics and finding the specific metric, right, for that thing, such that when you achieve that, when we say we did 4 of those this month, you have a really, really strong belief that that's going to lead to results, right? And so again, it's about trying to manufacture the correct input metric, right? Because the number of pieces of content that you published that month, over 3,000 words, that got more than 4 backlinks, is not a report that you can pull from analytics, right? So this is also the challenge, right? Is the challenge with input metrics is that you really have to go and manually create these spreadsheets, reporting, data pools, whatever it is. It isn't usually just sitting there in analytics, right? The things that are sitting there in analytics are the things that are easy to measure: traffic, rankings, impressions, revenue. Like, we can all measure those, and we should be reporting on those. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but we have to also measure the actual deliberate actions.
So I'll just repeat what you said in the way I understood it. So implementing SEO becomes much easier if we sort of break it down into projects where we are doing certain activity, or we're tackling a certain part of SEO, and there are very clear input metrics, and then we make them as specific as possible and as qualitative, even if it's qualitative, but we're reporting on those input metrics very clearly in a format that execs are more comfortable with. Instead of just saying that, hey, we're doing stuff, we can actually show them that, hey, this is what we've done, and we had agreed before starting off that, hey, if we do this, we should see something in the future. The second piece is maybe also have, and probably adding this, but maybe have some sort of near future, let's say a 1 month after that, maybe leading indicators that, hey, even if you aren't seeing revenue, you are seeing these things move around in this exact fashion which you define before you start, not after you not which you pick
Right.
conveniently after you've done it. And then the lagging indicators should just probably be your revenue, MQL, SQL, whatever you're targeting.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a concrete example to kind of illustrate it as well. So and this is actually a mistake that I made. So happy to put my hand up here. I was working with a client not that long ago, and they're a B2B SaaS company, right? And like most B2B SaaS companies, they had like 4 landing pages, right? And they hadn't built out all of the landing pages, like category pages, industry pages, versus pages, and so on, right? They hadn't built out most of that stuff. And so I made like a deck, like a strategy presentation that said, you should do more landing pages, right? You should create some versus pages, right? You should create some alternatives pages. And the opportunity for creating those pages is big, right? I kind of connected it back to MQLs and revenue off the back of that. But what I made was basically a kind of a static pitch, right? What I made was saying, like, a moment in time. I made a presentation. I said, you should do this. And then I handed it to them. And they said, wow, yeah, we really should do this. And then nothing much happened for a little while, right? I think it would have been more impactful if I'd made the pitch, if I made the strategy, and then I make a page on their Data Studio dashboard, because they already had a Data Studio report set up, which showed number of category pages, like, over time, right? And number of versus pages over time, right? Because what I'm basically saying is, if this thing is important to do, it should be important to measure, right? Like, if this thing is worth doing, then we should be looking at it every month as a metric that we care about, right? And so that, and so vice versa also is true. Is once it's on the dashboard, somebody's going to sit there and be like, why is that number not going up? Right? Why is that number still at 4? Right? Why do we only have 4 pages? Why do we have 0 versus pages? Like, 0 and 4 are not good numbers for me to look at every single month on this dashboard. So it's like, it's a small kind of psychological change in a sense, but actually makes a really big difference, especially when you start working with bigger and bigger companies, which is the more that you can bring the things that you're trying to get done to the level of awareness and level of understanding of the people who are looking at reporting every month, the more likely it is that those projects are going to get funded and that those metrics are going to move.
Wow. In my head, I'm just like, hey, just whatever Tom's saying, how can we implement this for our clients? Like, just take what you're saying, build it, and then just, package it in a very nice way. And yeah, so I'm personally getting a lot of value from this. We are on time. Do you have time to sort of go for a
I
few
have
more?
time. Yeah, I can keep riffing.
Awesome. So I'll go to the third point that you had shared that we wanted to cover, and then I think Shri and then some other folks have also asked a couple of questions. We can just go
Right.
and tackle this. Yeah, awesome. So the last one is you've mentioned the building financial models and forecast for SEO, right? So that's what you had mentioned you want to talk about. Um, I have seen this done in a couple of ways. Um, I think I've seen, and I had seen your, I don't remember it very well, but I think 2 years ago I had seen an example you had also shared with us. So the different ways that I've seen this done is one is that hey, this is a delta in traffic that we can expect, and if we ran ads for it, it would cost X amount. So this traffic, or we're bringing in this amount of, or this value of traffic to the website. That's one. I personally am not a very big fan of it, just because, yeah, I'm just not a very good fan of it because it's very hard to then take it and uh, to any next sort of metric for me.
Right.
The next method is what you've mentioned some time ago, that hey, have very clear input metrics, and for me that's similar to forecasting, because you would also be forecasting the input metrics, that hey, if the input metrics trend in this way, then your output metrics would trend in this way, which could just be the leading indicators. And then if these trend in this way, at some point of time your revenue would trend in this way. That could be maybe the second way to sort of look at financial models and forecasts. But yeah, like how, or I'm sure you do it in multiple ways, because seen even in the presentations you sort of refer to it in different ways. How do you think about it? And again, some people who are listening to this or will listen to this haven't done a lot of SEO forecasting. So even if you want to take it from the back,
Yeah.
that'll be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. SEO forecasting is a little, well, it's tricky for a number of different reasons, right? Some of the obvious reasons it's hard are because we don't know what impact it's going to have, right? It's like, it's very easy in a spreadsheet to say 5% uplift or 10% uplift, but like, we don't know, right? Like, why, how much of an impact are you going to get fixing a sitemap? It's like, I don't know, right? Like, how long is a piece of string? So SEO forecasting is hard for a number of reasons because we don't know, right? SEO forecasting is also hard because a forecast actually has a number of different uses, right? So a forecast for a CEO, for example, is typically about what is the size of the opportunity, right? So a forecast for a CEO is typically about what is the big opportunity we're trying to get to, and is that number interesting, and should I put the money in to get the money out, right? So it's like a calculation. It's like, if I put this money in, I'm going to get that money out. Yes or no? Do I say yes or no to this money? But SEO forecasting is also used for like financial modeling, right? So like the CFO, right, the finance leader, cares like, okay, in month 3, how much revenue should I be forecasting for? In month 6, how much revenue should I be forecasting for? What is that spend going to look like, right? And that, again, that's a very different kind of use case. So when we talk about SEO forecasting, there's lots of different types of forecasting and different stakeholders that might care about it and different ways to do it. And that's why, partly why it's hard, right? Not let alone the reason of just we have lots of unknowns, right? So I think that first of all, it's really useful to understand what is the objective of the forecast, right? Is the objective of the forecast to help a finance leader set goals, right? And to plan accordingly? Is the forecast designed for a CEO to understand the magnitude of the opportunity? Is the forecast designed to drive a headcount decision, right? To be able to say, yes, we need 2 people on the team or 3 people on the team to support this work, right? So again, there's lots of different goals and objectives that you might have for the forecast. Then the second piece is, and this is one of probably the biggest mistake that I see SEO forecasts make, is you can't make it too complicated. And this sounds counterintuitive, right? Because your first instinct, my first instinct when I make this, is I want to make it as correct as possible. So I want to account for seasonality and product launches and new events that are happening and changes in the algorithm and weekends versus weekdays, and I'm going to add a scale factor of 0.75 for this reason, and I'm going to adjust. Like, you want to be a scientist, right? And you want to try and make the most accurate forecast you can. The problem with that approach is that every single layer of complexity you add to the model reduces the chance that an executive can understand it. Right? You're basically placing a barrier between you and the executive, right? You go back to that black box model we talked about, right? It becomes more and more of a black box, more and more of SEO in, revenue out. Don't understand how it works, right? So what you need to do is you need to find the right balance between complexity and correctness and understandability, right? Legibility, right? Like the ability for an executive to look at it and understand. And that understanding is key because, again, 95% of the time, your model is going to rely on other people doing things, right? The product team is going to have to ship some changes. The content team is going to have to make some content. So that legibility, that understanding is so important, right? You can't be on the hook for SEO results when people don't understand that other people have to do stuff, right? You have to be able to connect the dots. And so that's why my favorite way to do the model is to try and do this kind of input metrics to output metrics kind of worksheet, right? Which says, okay, we need to do this much work, right? And that could be product sprints. It could be pieces of content made. It could be number of pages, number of landing pages created. It could be number of content marketing campaigns, right? It could be whatever, like whatever the things are that we need to do, connecting those numbers to the outputs to be able to say, if we do 5 of them, we'll get this. If we do 10 of them, we'll do this. So that everybody understands the lever we're pulling, right? It isn't a black box. It isn't a mystery model, right? Again, the downside to that is that you reduce complexity. Right? You have to make some pretty bold assumptions to be able to say, on average, every content marketing campaign is going to get us this, or every landing page is going to get us this, right? And that's an assumption. You're kind of you're kind of reducing the whole project down to a simple calculation, and that is a risk and a danger. But it's a risk and a danger that you have to make, right? In some way. Now, again, every business is different, right? So if you go and work, for example, somewhere like Amazon, they're going to have a much more sophisticated model for tracking and measuring and forecasting than a small B2B startup, right? So you have to kind of tailor it to the business you're working with. But in my mind, it's that understandability of the model, which is so important. And then the last piece that I'll say, and you saw this as part of the course as well last time, is my favorite way to approach modeling and forecasting is not to have the answer, but is to have 2 scenarios, right? Or 3 scenarios to be able to say, okay, option A, option B, and option C, depending on a range of variables, will get us A, B, or C results. Because executives love to have power. Executives love to choose. They love to be able to say, we're going to do B. And that was my choice, right? Instead of the SEO person trying to tell the CEO what to do or tell the business what to do. The SEO person is sat there with their expertise to be able to say, these are the range of options available to us. Which option would you like to do, right? What do you want to do? And then the executive comes in and says, well, we should do B, we should do C, we should do it this way, we should do it this way. Again, it's funny. One of the hardest questions to answer, which I find in the SEO world, is, okay, you've done all the work, you've convinced the CEO to invest in the project, you've got them excited about it, they understand it, and then the CEO says, well, why can't we do this faster? What happens if I put twice as much money into this, right? It's like, it's the opposite problem. You persuaded them to buy in, and now they really want to buy in, right? And ironically, that can be a really hard question to deal with, because you're like, actually, I don't know what we would do with twice the money, or I haven't done that calculation. I haven't done that. So anyway, I'm off on a side tangent now, but yeah, you're talking about forecasting and modeling. There's a number of reasons why it's hard, but I think the number one thing that you have to focus on is this understandability, right? And if you have too many calculations and too much science, then even though you're trying to do the right thing, you're trying to get to truth, you actually get in the way of yourself.
So I'll merge a couple of questions Sri Krishna from Factors and Deepika from Darwin Box have asked, right? Uh, so the first question from Shri was that, hey, do you measure the impact of content on pipeline revenue? And then Deepika asked about commercial intent keywords and SEO initiatives, right? So there's two questions out of this that I would like to ask. One is, so you've already answered that you measure the impact of content on pipeline and revenue. What I would like to ask you is, what about, so SEO can be a very good demand capture channel, right? So that's something we've seen. Uh, I think everyone can agree on that. Hey, capturing demand through SEO is really really helpful, and everyone should be doing it. Um, what about the other content that's not really bottom the funnel? You're not going to get conversions out of it. You are getting impressions and traffic out of it. Maybe traffic from relevant people in your industry, so the keywords are extremely relevant to it. Maybe they're even uh, in the middle of the funnel where people are trying to figure it out by themselves. They're still thinking about the problem. We still cannot show revenue. So it goes in the realm of demand gen. So in that case, how do you sort of measure the impact of content on pipeline revenue? I have a couple of thoughts on this, but I would love to see how you tackle this part.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of ways to think about this challenge. One is you have to really ask yourself, like, very honestly, like, why are you making that content? So like before you start justifying it to the business, justify it to yourself. Like let's be really clear. Like, why are you making it? Because if it isn't generating conversions directly, let's really be honest about, is it worth doing? Right now, I'm not saying it's not, right? I'm not saying it's not. That it can totally be worth doing, but I think you really have to be straight in your mind. Like, are you making this content because you believe that it has some like attribution, right? It's like part of the conversion path, but we can't measure it, right? That's one belief. Are we doing it because we believe that topical authority will drive rankings for commercial queries? That's another belief. Are we doing it because with this content will get links, right, and therefore will drive kind of overall SEO benefit? Are we doing it because the people that land on this content will sign up for an email list and then convert further down the line? Each of those beliefs has a very different measurement model and attribution model, right? In terms of like, how do you justify the value of it, right? And it could be some combination of the above, right? But you have to be really clear about which of it is, because if you're confusing all of those things together, if you're saying what's a little bit of all of those, right? That's a really hard sell to the business, right? That's a really hard sell to an executive who already thinks that SEO is a black box. For you to say like, well, this content's a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, it's like that's a hard message to sell to the business. So I think it's about choosing. Again, it comes back to this financial modeling idea. You have to kind of choose an approximation of the value of this content, right? Again, based on links or based on email signups or based on whatever, to be able to say, this is why we're doing it and this is how I'm going to measure it. And again, going back to that input metrics, right? It isn't just the number of pieces of content published. Right? It's a very, very crude metric. It's about, can we get to the number of pieces of content published that are over a certain word count, or that generate a certain number of links, or generate a certain number of email signups, right? Whatever we believe the real leading indicator or input metric is that we believe will drive results further down the line. That's how I would try and approach it. The alternative to that, so that's one way to think about it, is really being clear in your own mind. The other perspective is, just because you can't measure it every month in analytics doesn't mean that you can't run a one-off measurement project, right? So if we believe that this content is part of the funnel, but we're not measuring it in an attribution way, then there are ways to try and get to that value of like saying, well, you look at the before and after of when we got a big spike in traffic, and you try and figure out, did that have a downstream impact on conversions, and therefore can we attribute some of those conversions to this content? Or you run a post-purchase survey, right? And you say, actually, like, we surveyed our users and 10% of them said they found us through content, right? So, okay, therefore we can justify the content. So it's about saying, just because we can't measure it month on month in an attributable way doesn't mean there isn't a way to measure the impact in some other way, right? Again, traditional marketing and branding does this all the time, right? So I was working with a client a couple of years ago, and they were running a ton of radio ads, and because they couldn't measure them, right? They didn't know if they were working. They ran a deliberate test where they ran radio ads only in certain geographic locations, and then measured the conversion uplift in those geographic locations, right? They did it once, but then they used that calculation once they'd figured out that it had a, whatever percentage calculation or impact on revenue. They used that calculation everywhere for like years afterwards, right? Even though they just had that one study, they found the stat and then they used that over time. So again, we have to think like marketers, we have to think like business owners to be able to say, okay, we can't see the impact in Google Analytics month on month, but that doesn't mean that we can't measure it. So again, I think it's about, first of all, getting straight in your own mind about what value this content has, what are we actually what is our belief, and then trying to find whatever way we can of measuring that in some form.
Your answer is amazing. Like, I love the way you answered it, and you sort of showed all the different, uh, so many different ways that you can think about this. Uh, so the things that I basically talk about often, right? So if you uh, building trust in SEO is very important to before you go ahead with a lot of these things. So why not just start with things that are easy to measure, right? So that's one. So just start with things that you know will get you revenue. Just start there, show some revenue, and then go to the harder to measure activities. That's one thing that we at least advocate for. um, and the second thing is, uh, we try and advocate people away from measuring clicks and impressions as a general metric. For example, the most popular blog on our website, on our agency's website, is this blog about brand adjectives, right? It generates maybe half the traffic we get, and that's absolutely useless traffic. It's related to marketing, which we do, but there's no revenue impact of that blog whatsoever,
Right.
right? So um, what we advocate for is, if you're looking at impressions and traffic, at least look at only the stuff that is relevant to the buying journey or to your audience, and at least your audience is searching for it. And if you are not sure, then just ignore it. And then you're looking at relevant impressions and relevant traffic. And this is something that we've been saying for a long time. So if you think there's something wrong in this, I'd be very happy if you call me out on that.
No, that sounds great. I think there's a really kind of delicate trade-off, I think, between focusing on things that you can do versus things that will move the needle for the business, right? So again, this is very, very common in the SEO world, right? It's like you start working with a client and the client wants quick wins. And you want to give quick wins to the client too, because you want to show value, right? The problem is sometimes that quick wins can anchor you on only looking at the things that are easy to do, instead of looking at the things that we really should be doing, but are harder or take more time, right? And so there's a trade-off there. It's not one or the other, but there's a trade-off. And so I think it's important to understand and recognize the dangers of going down that quick wins path. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, right? But it's important to understand that there can be downsides, and that especially because you go all the way back to that conversation we had about early in the project, anchoring and educating the client to the things that we really need to get done instead of waiting, right? So again, I'm just going to hold my hand up. I've been in a situation, right, where you work with a client. There are so many quick wins to do that the first couple months of the project are focused on the quick wins. And again, it's only 3 or 6 months into the project that you kind of turn around and say, okay, now we've done all the quick wins. Let's really do the hard work of doing, fixing our category pages or whatever. And the client says, oh, well, we hadn't allocated that for this year's resources. We can't do that for another like 9 months, right? So now you're like way deep in the project, waiting for the big work to be done, right? Instead of on day one saying, we're going to need to do this category work, right? Like start reserving those resources when we can, even though we can't get those resources for 9 months. In the meantime, we're going to do some quick wins, but it's the framing of the work to say, we're not going to ignore the hard stuff. right? We're not going to ignore it. We might not be able to do it right now, but we're not going to ignore it. And again, I think that the more that you work, especially with bigger businesses, you understand that every time a client doesn't do something, it isn't a no, it's a not yet. Right? Every business will eventually come around to the thing that you want to get done. It might just take years. And you have to be okay with that. There has to be a mental model for saying, okay, how do we keep this project alive? How do we keep doing things? How do we keep doing work? How do we keep this recommendation top of mind so that when the resources do become available, we're ready for it, right? And that, again, that's not an easy challenge to overcome.
Yeah, I always joke around that hey, doing SEO for a company is like doing demand generation, but inside the company for
Yeah,
your
yeah,
for your channel. Um,
totally.
awesome. I had one question. I don't know if you have to jump off, just let me know. But there's one question I wanted to really ask you. How do you measure the impact of backlinks now? Right, so we have our ways, we've seen some patterns, and then based on that we've been making recommendations. Some of it really goes against uh, logic as well, that hey, maybe this is not a good practice. So I just wanted to understand, how do you think about backlinking, and then the projecting any kind of business results out of that?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think that there are really two primary ways to measure backlinks, and also measure the value of backlinks specifically. One is to look at the competitive landscape, right? So let's take a particular keyword we're going after, and we say, okay, our competitors have on average 200 backlinks a page. We have 45. To close that gap, right, would take 150 backlinks. But if we close that gap and we believe that we could go from position 8 to position 3, that would be worth this much revenue, right? So then you basically have a calculation, which is like revenue on one side, 150 backlinks on the other. You can do the math, right? That's one way to do it. The danger of doing that on a keyword by keyword level is that it's easy to find instances where the competitors have 20 backlinks and we have 80, and we still rank position 8 and they rank position 2, right? Backlinks are not the only lever, and it's also not a one-to-one signal, right? So again, what we have to challenge ourselves to do is say, well, what is a better measure, right? Is it backlinks over a certain domain authority? Is it some kind of average, weighted average, right? Whatever it might be. So we have to force ourselves to hold ourselves to the truth, right? Of like what is a bit more relevant or a bit more like modeling reality. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, and this is a very crude way to do it, but something that I have seen work somewhat successfully, is to say, if we bought the backlinks, they would cost us like $1,000 a link. Therefore, a link is worth $1,000. And so, and it's super crude, right? It doesn't really, it doesn't have the same predictive power as the alternative way, but it's very easy to understand, right? And again, it comes back to this idea of the more you can make the model legible to the business, the more that it's easy to get buy-in, everyone understands what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. And so sometimes that method can be just as useful to be able to say, you know what, we're going to measure them at $1,000 a piece, and that allows us to have a calculation of, well, we should have 4 full-time people, or we should have an investment of $25,000, because we can now measure the output on the other side in dollars, not in links, right? So again, it comes back to that equation, like the left side, right side that you mentioned in the equation, which is always, if you're asking for money on the left side of the equation, you have to be able to show money on the other side of the equation. You can't have dollars on one side and MQLs on the other, or dollars on one side and links on the other, right? You have to have dollars on both sides if you're asking for money. And so you have to get somehow to a calculation of value per link. But I'm curious to hear how you do it, because I think there's a million different ways to approach it.
Oh yeah, we do it exactly. So there are 2 or 3 different sprints which include backlinks for us, right? So one of them is basically a critical keyword sprint, where we say that hey, we figure out all the keywords that are very critical to your business, and then let's say we've made a list of 50 keywords, and then we sort of consult a bit on that hey, these keywords you think are critical but are not really, because intent this and that, and we try and narrow it down to like this 20-25 keywords that everyone should, like even the CEO should know what your rank is there. because that's how, like, if you
Right.
rank for all of those, you'll probably see a major spike in revenue for years, right? So that's how critical they are. So we try and figure out those, and then we try and create a menu out of the 20 that, hey, if you ranked for this, we estimate that if you are in position 2, this is the pipeline value you can generate based on the traffic, based on um, all the cost metrics and everything. We sort of try and dig that, hey, we see that, hey, we think you can rank here. This page would have to be, we'll need a new page, or we'll have to sort of do internal linking or whatever, and we add a time estimate to it. And then we add a cost estimate to backlinks, just like you mentioned. It's like a mixture of the two measures. And then we have like a pipeline generated in dollars versus like a cost for backlinks, and then a hours for amount of work to be done. And that's like the one version. Another version is that, hey, these pages, we get X number of backlinks with specific anchor texts to and then we'll need this many backlinks, and we believe if we get there should be an increase in in ranking. Again, pretty much the same thing, but we don't need 100 this time. We need like 3 uh, average backlinks,
Right.
and then there we measure the increase. But let's say 3 out of, if we can get it for like 30% of the pages in 6 months or so, that's like a win. That's how we sort of measure it. Um, that's
Yeah.
how we figured out way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it sounds good. I mean, the last thing to say there is just it's really important to take that project from the hypothetical, right, the abstract, like spreadsheet model, and to find real examples. So this is when you're pitching that project and you're trying to advocate for the work, being able to point to even a single real example where you can say, we can show causality, right? You can show we did this content marketing campaign, it generated these links, and then this page started ranking, right? If you could just show that causality, that kind of thing really helps an executive go from, what is this link building? Is it really worth it? I don't really buy it. It's a lot of mumbo jumbo, to, oh, okay, this works. Yeah, we have a real example. Like we know this works, right? That evidence, even if it's just a single data point, can be really valuable. Can really change the mindset of an executive from, I'm not sure, to, oh yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah, I'll put money in this. It can really change it.
Yeah, that's yeah. We are trying to now document that and build that, and that's, we had a discussion about that. We don't have it right now, so we've had examples, we've not documented it properly. So we're working on that. So I really appreciate you coming. It's been an hour, so I really appreciate your time.
No, of course.
Uh,
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Some good questions,
yeah,
and it's great to catch up and hear about everything's going with you. So nice to chat.
yeah. I mean, likewise. I and just know that I keep telling everyone that, hey, Tom is one of the top 5 SEOs in the world by far. I always tell this to people.
I don't know about that anymore. Maybe one day, 15 years ago, but I don't know about that today. But I appreciate the words anyway.
Yeah, and everyone at SpearGrowth, right? At least. So once they get to a certain level in SEO, we're like, okay, now do the SEO course. You get better at SEO communication. That's like something that we were discussing today. We've discussed earlier. It's just like the default thing that we think about. So I really appreciate that as well.
Great,
Yeah.
great. Well, that's great to hear, and yeah, again, nice to hear how you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll put a link to the blog that you were mentioning earlier, to, for anyone who wants to read. If you want to maybe even subscribe or check out the course that I've been. And again, it's this is not like a paid promotion. I honestly think it's an amazing course, and I would recommend it to anyone um, who actually understands SEO. If you're good at SEO, do it. If you are not sure if you're good at SEO, don't do it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what I would
totally.
say.
Yeah, there's nothing. The course will not teach you how to do SEO. That's for sure. It's all
Yeah,
about the, but it will teach you how to get more budget and more buy-in for the stuff. So
yeah,
yeah, no, it's
and
great. It's good to hear, and I appreciate the kind words about the course. So
yeah, and that's what. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Tom. This has been a blast. I asked a lot of questions which I had, and I got answers to them from you, which is amazing. So thank you so much again.
all right, thanks for having me on.
Awesome.